Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. We're talking about things that affect you and your condo homeowners association or co-op. And if you've got any kind of questions or concerns, we're here to help you. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA and a licensed community association manager still. Thank goodness. And along with me is my co-host, Peter Mullengarden, who's an attorney with a specialty in real estate and condo law, and has been doing this type of work, more importantly, for about 40 or so years. So he's got a lot of experience, can answer a lot of questions, has seen a lot of things, and he'd be happy to do that for you. Let me give you a phone number so you can write it down, even if you don't have a question right now. It's good to have it so you can call later. The number is 220-9788. 220-WSTU, that's area code 772. And you call and Evan will answer the phone, and you give him a name. Doesn't have to be your name. Could be my name. I don't care. But that's a little confusing when I'm saying my same name to myself. But anyway, that's the thing. You just give him a name so we don't have to call you Hey You. And then there's the only other ground rules is that we ask that you provide us with information about your association, but we don't want your association name. And we also want you to realize that we're going to give you the best answer we can, but as we say all the time, the answer can change based on your documents. So we're going to rely on your interpretation of the documents, which we know can be confusing, and the standard rules, regulations, law. But if you're really going to court, don't use radio as your answer. Contact somebody like Peter and get an answer, and we'll go from there. So anyway, that's the basic ground rules. And good morning, Peter. How are you? Are you there? Whoops. Yeah, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you today?
Hi. I'm well. Good morning.
So we got a caller on, but before we get to the caller, I just wanted to make a general announcement because sometimes people don't see this. I just wanted to let everybody know that Dr. Fauci has said that we can have Halloween. But here's the thing. You should wear a mask. And furthermore, the mask needs to be either Elsa or Little Mermaid, one of those two, because we're sticking to it this year. So anyway, I just didn't know if you heard that word. So I was going to kind of mention that to you, Peter, so you know right away off the top at the beginning of the show here. So you're up to date. You've got the most current news relative to Halloween. So anyway.
Actually, I already saw the recommendations, but thank you anyway.
Did you see the stuff about Elsa and Little Mermaid?
No, not Elsa.
You missed that? Oh man! See, that's the important stuff. And I got to go tell my granddaughter.
I was going to wear my Mark Breckbill mask, but I don't want to frighten too many children.
That's illegal in most states. But anyway, all right, we've got a call this morning. Diane, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Our board, our condo board, doesn't allow questions during after board meetings, and I understand that they don't have to allow us to, owners to talk or to respond during a meeting. But when they close the meeting, they open it up for comments. But if you ask a question, we're told that that's not the forum to ask questions. They have not set up any forum to ask questions, but they do say that we can call them directly. And I know, I know that I feel that their philosophy is that they just don't want others to gather together and criticize them. And I understand that, but is there any law, any ordinance that says that you have a right to ask questions from the board in a public meeting?
This is
owners.
I'm going to let Peter go, but on this, but I just want to mention that for our listeners that this is a topic that's very interesting because it's kind of a situation where they have to allow you to do stuff, but they don't actually have to do anything based on it. So, Peter, go ahead. Why don't you follow up?
Well, owners are allowed by law, by statute, to speak at every board meeting. Okay. And to speak on any agenda item, that is raised or is on the agenda for the board meeting. The law does not get specific with respect to asking questions or whether the board is obligated, quite frankly, to answer any questions. It's just that the owners have they're allowed to speak. So during an owner's time of speaking, he or she can ask questions. Is the board required to respond? No. I mean, they literally could sit there like statues and not respond. It may not be a good look, politically, or otherwise. But the short answer to your question is no. I mean, there's no requirement that they be allowed to ask questions per se, but they have to allow them to speak. So if that's what you're getting at, in other words, if the board is not even allowing them to speak during the board meeting, that's not permitted. I mean, that's not proper. But the issue of questions itself, I know we're kind of splitting hairs here a little bit, but if I'm speaking during my allotted time on whatever the topic is, whatever the agenda item is, I can ask as many questions as I want during my time period, whether it's 2 or 3 minutes. Whether they respond or not, it's kind of up to the board members there.
Yeah, it's that's why I say it's really kind of messed up. In fact, what's the purpose of that was, of course, was for boards to receive input from members, presumably before they made a decision. But the way the law is written, they could have already decided. They could have already taken a vote, and then they just open it up for comments at the end. And I have seen, not condo meetings, but I've seen other kinds of meetings where that actually happens, where they open it up for comments, and then the board or commission just stops listening. They don't care. They're obviously not listening.
I mean, even though it's not in the statutes, and this is, I think, Mark, this is what you're getting at. It doesn't say that when those comments are done. Just it's that they're allowed to speak on agenda items. I always tell my clients the owner comments should occur before the board votes. Otherwise, the comments become meaningless or somewhat meaningless.
Right.
But I guess theoretically, some associations have the comments afterwards. While the board meeting is still going, you can't adjourn it. It has to be during the board meeting. I tell my clients that the owner comments need to occur either before the board comments or after the board speaks, but before the board votes. Just that's what I advise them.
Now, one of the things I would suggest, and this is something for you too, Diane, is what you don't want is your board to be in a situation where they're all of a sudden in a dialogue with, and that's why dialogue with people asking questions, because then, it becomes it can become argumentative. And so that's maybe why somebody is directing your board to not allow questions, because questions would require answers from the board members, and that would potentially generate some sort of a negative situation, potentially. If you've got 1 or 2 board members arguing with 1 or 2 members about what should be done or something else, then, so that could be why they're saying that. And when they say that there's other forums, what they're getting at is that, you can request information from a board, including answers to things. You can send in there's a process where you send that in by certified mail. They have to respond.
For condominiums, there is.
Yeah, I'm sorry, for condominiums.
Yeah, this is a condominium.
Okay, so so for that kind of thing, there is the ability to address an issue that way. It's more cumbersome, because sometimes people just want an answer. The other thing that I think boards don't do enough of is education. A lot of times, you'll have members, unit owners, that they really don't fully know all of the laws that you have to deal with, unless you've gone to some kind of training course. You've gone to a CAM licensing course or something, and even then, you're not going to know everything. But a lot of times we'll see new board members, people who have gotten on because they want to make a change, and then all of a sudden they find out, oh, gee, you can't really do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. Well, what are we supposed to do? And sometimes it's just what the last guys were doing. But anyway, I think it's ridiculous that there's not a way to get information, because I personally believe that the more an association and the board is educated and educates the community, the better the community you have. There's more conversation, more transparency. People don't think somebody's trying to hide something. So, but it's frustrating. This is a frustrating kind of law, because it just doesn't really, it doesn't provide probably as much requirement as it should. It's very broad.
Well, the board ran as a group, a team, which makes sense to me. But they ran saying that they would be more communicative, they would be more transparent. But my feeling is that they don't want any public disagreement with them. And it's not even disagreement; it's asking. You can't ask questions because you will not get answers you will not get answers that way. You can, we're allowed to, as you say, send a certified letter. We can email them. You may or may not get an answer email, but you might get a phone call back or something,
So
forbid we should put anything in writing,
Yeah.
I mean, here's a question. I mean, when they have the board meeting, how is it conducted in terms of owner comments or owner speaking? I mean, when do they speak and what are they allowed to say?
Owners, after the meetings are adjourned, they open it up for comments.
Yeah.
Well, that is,
if you ask a question, you're immediately shut down and they go on to the next person.
They are that is contrary to law.
Right.
Okay. Basically, during that board, because once it's adjourned, there is no more board meeting. Now
Right.
you're in just
That's correct.
free for all time.
Right.
So the statute is pretty clear here for a change that any owner is allowed to speak on any agenda item. Okay. Period.
All right, and that's during the meeting.
Different associations do it
during the
different
meeting.
ways.
Okay.
Like I said before, I advise mine to allow the owners to speak as that agenda item is being addressed and before the board votes on it. Like I said, they cannot stop an owner. This is kind of silly, but they can't. During my time, if I want to ask questions, I can ask questions. Again, they're not required to answer my questions, but I can ask as many questions as I want during my allotted time. And the way they're running the meeting, quite frankly, is not correct. Again, if they don't want to answer, that's their choice. But they have to allow me or you or any other owner at that meeting. If I want to ask 16 questions about the painting contract or the roofing contract or whatever happens to be on the agenda, I'm allowed during my, again, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but I'm allowed during my time to say whatever I want to say within the bounds of,
Agenda item.
constructive,
so
comments.
you can make a request to the board that they follow statute and that they have a comment period during the board meeting, not after it's adjourned. And then, and if they then refuse to do that, they're in violation of the statute. So they'll be forced to change. But yes. And that's the reason that's there, of course, is so that other people in the community who may either have the same question or may be confused about a matter can hear other people's comments, other people's concerns, and see if maybe they have the same concern or question. So, that's why it's there, and it is a good rule. I think allowing people to have input in their home is a good rule, but and so, like we said, you don't have to answer. They don't have to answer, but they do have to do it during the board meeting. And so, at that point, you need to. You can ask that be the case. And actually I would, I would first make a request to the board ahead of time, send it into the either the secretary or the president so that it's put on the agenda as a request that, that the questions or comments, I should say, be put on the agenda. And then if they refuse to do that, I would bring it up. I would bring it up as a point of order in the next meeting.
Okay.
and say I'd like an opportunity to comment, and and then maybe even be prepared to kind of give them a reference if you need to in terms of where that is. And Peter probably knows right off the top of his head, but anyway, so
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
yeah, just be prepared for that.
I have a second question. May I?
Sure. Go ahead.
Is there a time period for which minutes of a meeting should be posted for owners after they are accepted at the following board meeting?
I'm not. I think that's just
a meeting held in January. The February monthly meeting, those minutes are accepted,
right,
but they're not posted, and it's August. Is that a problem?
Well, I would think so. I think that the statute, Peter probably knows, I think the statute is a reasonable period of time, and supposed to be made available within a reasonable period of time. I'm not sure about the posting, but I know it has to be available. And in general, that does not include drafts. So once you've finalized your minutes and it's been approved, like you said, at the next meeting, the draft should go away. There's no requirement to keep the draft that you had. There's no requirement to keep, you don't have to keep any kind of dictation that you took or any kind of verbal. Yeah. But I believe it's supposed to be available for unit owner review within a reasonable period of time. But
okay, and if the minutes were not reviewed and accepted and voted on by the board at a following meeting, how long can they put off accepting minutes of a meeting?
Well, the minutes of a meeting are a record. I don't know, Peter. Is there a time limit on that?
As far as when they post the minutes?
Yeah, how long no, both posting and how long they have to actually finalize the minutes. I mean, how long do they have to do that? That should be within 30 days.
There isn't any specific time.
Okay.
Like you said, it is a reasonable time. I always told them, 30 days, but as far as I recall, there's not a specific time period.
I really think that you probably, just as a general matter, it's probably not going to be a reasonable time if you've approved the next month's minutes before you've approved the last month's minutes. That there should be there should not be a valid reason for for a delay like that. The minutes are just a record of what happened, and as we said before, many times the minutes are too long. They have too much information in there that's not required. So if the reason that minutes aren't being approved is because it's a he said, she said, and everybody's trying to figure out exactly what was that's not required, and that shouldn't even be in there.
Right.
It only gets people into trouble. That way, it's not necessary, just motions and approvals. So that should have been pretty straightforward. But the other issue, though, that comes up from time to time is whether or not you had a quorum. So there could be an issue where it was determined kind of after the fact, or that they didn't have a quorum for some reason. And that's becoming more of an issue with people on electronically. The
Zoom.
Yeah. The person's there. You've got a quorum when you start, and then something happens and you don't have a quorum, and it may be that as a result, one of the votes wasn't valid because there wasn't a required quorum. Although, Peter, are they allowed to take action if they have a quorum when the meeting opens and don't have a quorum when it closes?
They have a quorum when the action was taken.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Let's say you open the meeting, you got a quorum because you got somebody on Zoom. That makes your quorum. You got your quorum. Now you start going through the agenda items, and it comes time to vote on something. And the person that was one of the people that was on Zoom is no longer on.
No, how can you have a vote on something without
Okay.
a quorum?
Well, I do know that there are some situations where actions are allowed if you open the meeting with a quorum. As long as you had a quorum to open the meeting, that you could still take action. But I didn't think it was the case with a condominium association, but I wasn't 100% sure. So so that's where, I mean, I guess there could be confusion with minutes sometimes if it turns out that you didn't have a quorum and you really didn't realize it. You didn't have a quorum, and now you can't post the minutes because they're not official because you didn't have a quorum. So
okay, well, I mean, a major meeting is an annual meeting or a budget meeting, and if they don't post the minutes of those, what's a reasonable time for a major meeting? Is it different, or do they?
Actually,
Eventually they have to post minutes, correct?
Well, I think that they are required to do that. There's notice requirements of the meeting. So you've got requirements that you got to give notice for the meeting. And if there's an election, you have to, that has to be far enough in advance that people can, decide they want to run and for the board, and they can put in a fact sheet, and then, you still got, 14 days for them to have notification. And so there's, that time frame dictates, kind of when you can have the meeting. But as far as the minutes, I mean, the minutes of that meeting aren't going to be approved until next year's annual meeting, on an annual meeting, typically. So,
okay. How about a budget meeting? Is that also an annual?
That's a board. Yeah,
that's a board. Typically,
yeah,
that's
but they
a
can
board
approve
meeting.
that at the next board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that definitely should be out before the budget is approved. That would be nice. So that you at least know what was the logic and discussion behind the budget and the budget numbers. So, and I think, I think there's going to be more, I think budget meetings are going to be, there's going to be more attention paid to budget meetings, particularly as it relates to reserves this year. So, I think, my opinion, even though I know Peter and I tend to disagree on this one, I tend to think budget meetings should be, should be open to the members, and, they should be run more like a member meeting than a board meeting. But that there's no requirement to do that. The board can control all of that. So, and most of them do. Anyway, so that's where I think that's where you're at is on an annual meeting. Technically, the official minutes aren't going to be available till the next annual meeting, but board meetings should be available monthly. And typically, I would think a reasonable period of time would be next month's meeting, but at most 2 months. There's no reason why it should be longer than 2 months. And so I would put in a request. I would request those minutes and see what they give you as a response back. If they say they're not available, not done, I would, send a note back. I mean, I'd send a request back and say, why aren't they done if we're 6 months beyond, the meeting date? Let them, say, well, we didn't have a quorum, or, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I have asked in writing. I did mention it at a meeting, which didn't go over well. And they don't have them yet.
And they don't give you any reason?
They tell me that the secretary was out of town. They don't know. They can't find them.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm waiting. That's all. I just wanted to know if there was what a reasonable amount of time is. And
I guess in your board's case, when they find them, I don't know. I guess I've never heard that before,
I'm
but
not even doubting that. It's just that I'm sure they will. I know they will. It's a public meeting. I just think that they should just do it, and
Well, I think
anyway.
I think that's really, really great, because now we know the condo version of the dog ate my homework.
Yes, that's about what it is. Yeah.
So anyway, well, that's kind of interesting. So no, I think that there needs to be something done. But at some point, I think that they just need to own up and say, well, here's what we got. Somebody should be able to remember what motions were passed and who voted for them. I mean, it's possible that there wasn't any action taken at that meeting that required documentation.
Wrong.
Well,
and I'm thinking of a specific meeting, and having listened to this, I know they took the vote, and I know what the motion was. I know, but I'm not the secretary, and they need to put this together and just do it.
Yeah, well, then there's no reason why. So that sounds like somebody that doesn't want to go on record is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, they assure me that's not it, but okay.
Yeah, sounds like that's send them a draft minutes. Say, here, does this help?
Hey, you know what? That might work.
That's what you should do.
That's really not a bad idea. Thank you.
Give them some assistance. Just help out. So anyway. All right. Well, those are good questions. And do you have any more?
No, I'm good for now. Thank you very much for your help. Thank you.
Very good questions. Thank you very much for calling in. All right. So,
I always tell my associations to create them within like 30 days of the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you did forget something, within 30 days, you probably can remember it or somebody will remember it. But you get 4 or 5 months out, nobody remembers what happened. Did we have a meeting back? One of those kind of things. Did we have a meeting back then? Yeah. So it's, it is.
And I'm trying to remember if the administrative code has a time period. So
I thought that that's the problem. It's just a reasonable period of time, but, and the problem, of course, is annual meetings, because you only have an annual meeting once a year. So thus the annual, but, and so it's that's one of the ones where really you don't know if the minutes are official until the next annual meeting. But, and again, what we're talking here is for condo associations. The laws aren't as specific for HOAs, and so there's more latitude.
You have to keep. By the way, you have to keep the minutes now forever. It used to be 7 years, and now you have to keep them for the life of the association. That was a change as far as the records go.
Yeah, that was on my quiz. That was on my licensing quiz when I was updating get my CP. That was one of the questions.
Okay.
So I actually,
that's it. Well, that was a pretty important change.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that is. It is. So it was. Yeah, I got that. For those that need continuing education credit that are property managers, Burt Rogers School is really good for that. So I got to give those guys credit. And actually, all of there's some online and there's some, stuff. But I was going to say the one thing I liked about this one is that they called me and let me know, hey, by the way, your legal update's going to expire midnight tomorrow if you don't turn it in. So you might want to get it done, which I did last week and got it finished. But yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. They didn't have any requirement to do that, and they probably would have ended up selling me another legal update if I hadn't done it. But anyway, so I got that taken care of. All right, we've got a caller. Kathleen, go ahead.
Hi, I have a couple of questions
Sure.
regarding special assessments.
Okay, go ahead.
My questions are, is the board required to give us a quote on all the items they want to do? Is there a start and end times that are mandatory? And my other is, how many assessments can a board do or give us? And how much time do we have to pay that assessment off?
And I'm going to add another question to that, Peter. Can you charge interest on delayed payment?
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so go ahead. Thanks, Kathleen. That was good. So Peter, what's the answers here? I'm not 100. I don't know 100% on special assessment.
what was the question about whether you have to have quotes?
Yeah, whether you
sorry,
have
say
to
it.
specifically have quotes as to what the special assessment is for, right, Kathleen? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, the actual costs of each item, we have this huge list, and there's no quotes attached. It's just their best guesstimates.
Well, the answer is no. I mean, they are required. I guess these two things are somewhat linked. I mean, all depends what the job is or what the money's for. The association is required, if it's a condominium, to get bids on any project or any contract or any work that exceeds 5% of the budget. So there is that requirement to get bids. The actual special assessment, though, as far as where the numbers come from, there is no specific requirement of where those numbers come from. The only thing about the special assessment meeting, the board meeting, is that they have to indicate in the meeting notice, which gets sent to the owners 14 days in advance and posted 14 days in advance, is that meeting notice has to indicate that they're going to consider the adoption of a special assessment, and it has to include the amount and the purposes of the special assessment. And it says that purposes plural. So
Right.
literally they could list 10 items and the overall number without breaking out how much for each item. You could say we're going to, have a special assessment of $500,000 for these 10 things, because it says the amount and the purposes. It doesn't say the amount per purpose. I've seen it done both ways. There's no requirement that they indicate where those figures come from. Presumably they did come from some source, not just out of thin air. Again, typically they may have been from the bids that they've received, or if the engineer that they're working with may have told them that, this is the estimated it'll cost to do these things. So there has to be some basis to it. But again, the statute doesn't say specifically that the source of those numbers have to be shown or listed on the minutes, or in the notice.
And here's one thing that should happen and doesn't always on when that is approved, when that special assessment is approved, there should be language in there that says what happens if the money isn't spent. Does it go for other working capital purposes? Does it go into a reserve account? Because if you don't say that, it goes back to the unit owners. So a good special assessment will indicate not only what it's expected to be spent on, but what happens if it's not all spent, if it turns out they don't need all of that. Does it just, because otherwise it gets returned. And a lot of times, because there is uncertainty on things, it usually is a better idea to have some provision in there for it to go into reserves. If it's a capital improvement, if it's a working capital issue, then of course have it go into working capital. But
the surplus?
Yeah, the surplus, anything that's left over.
Yeah, well, the surplus either goes back to the owners or it's credited toward a future assessment.
Yeah. So but if, like, for example, if it's going for working capital, then that means that money could be used. So,
but you still have to show it as a credit.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it doesn't have to go in. It doesn't have to go into reserve account, right? Type thing or something like that. It could be refunded, and that.
Well, you either refund it or you credit it.
Right.
But there was another question. I'm sorry. There was the quote, and
I was asking about. Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
The finish, beginning dates and finish dates. Is there a time that has to be completed?
No, I mean it's a reasonable time. You mean as far as the work that the assessment was assessed for, whatever it might be?
Correct.
No, the statute doesn't have any specificity about how long the project or projects need to be completed within. I mean, there's an implied reasonable time, but there's nothing in the law that says about beginning and ending.
Okay,
Yeah.
How many times can they do an assessment in any given amount of years?
It's unlimited.
Really?
Yeah, there is no requirement. The whole thing with special assessments are to cover, you have to check your own documents, but special assessments really are defined as, for assessments that are outside the budget, or they're not covered by the budget, either because items were unanticipated or they were more expensive than anticipated, because the budget's just a guess, right? So special assessments are used, quite frankly, for shortfalls where the budget doesn't, where there's not enough money, either with reserves or the operating, for the expenditures that the association is incurring. Typically, there is no limit. I mean, you can have multiple special assessments in a year,
but you cannot not
you can't
budget.
deliberately under budget,
Right.
but
I've seen boards try to pull the insurance out and say, we're going to special assess for the insurance because we don't know what the number is going to be. You can't do that. That's an operating expense supposed to be covered in the general budget. Your job is to make the best guesstimate possible. If you're wrong, you go back and amend the budget, or you can then do a special assessment at that point. But you have to make a reasonable guess as to what that insurance expense is going to be, because it's part of your part of your operating budget. It's got to be, and so that's the thing that I see people do from time to time, is they don't want to budget for something in their regular assessment, and so they leave it out so that they can keep assessments the same, and then they sneak in a special assessment to cover a specific item, which they knew should have been covered in their operating budget. Now, like Peter said, sometimes you just guess wrong and you have to have a special assessment to make up for it, but nobody likes special assessments. The other thing is that if you've got multiple projects, I think it's better, to actually, you can have them simultaneous, because as Peter said, you can have as many special assessments as you want, but I think it's a good idea to make those special assessments as specific as possible, because it does keep them from dragging on and dragging on and dragging on. If, for example, if I have a special assessment and I'm going to do a special assessment to replace the AC unit and to fix balconies and spalling, right? Well, that's a long time difference between replacing the AC unit and the time it's going to take, and the amount of money, which we don't know, that it's going to take to do that spalling work. So my special assessment number is going to be really pretty broad, because I have no idea what I'm going to find when I get into the spalling, how long it's going to take, and anything else. But I know how much the AC unit is going to cost me probably, and I know it probably is going to be installed in a year because everything's backlogged, but I at least know how long that's going to take and how much it's going to be. So when you start mixing a lot of things that have very nebulous or long-term durations, it can make the special assessments much more complicated. Now, the question I had for Peter, because I always, you cannot, I don't think, Peter, and I ask you this as a question, I guess. If I want to delay the payment, I want to give people an opportunity to pay. So let's say I've got a $500,000 spalling project, and I'm going to allow them to pay in a year or in 2 years, right? Now, first of all, assume I can do that, correct? I'll have a deferred payment.
is this the interest question?
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
well, it's
actually,
both. It's interest.
There was a case on this, and I don't have the name. I think the name was like Portofino something association. Anyway, but in that case, the association gave the owners basically a choice. They could pay their special assessment up front. Let's say it's $1,000, just for a round number, or they could pay over time with interest, and that was held to be perfectly fine. You could allow, you could charge interest to pay the assessment over time as opposed to paying it up front, because there is, I guess, the cost of money, right? So
right.
the fact that you were deferring and getting that ability, you pay for that through the interest. So the answer is yes, you can. Now, I don't know, that was specifically where they had a choice of upfront or over time. So in specifically, the answer was, yeah, you can charge the interest because you're allowing them, to pay in installments, just like when you buy a car or something like that. You pay your
Now,
cash up front, pay over time with interest.
now here's the twist to that. What about
Or
a situation where, yeah, I always have a twist, right? So what about the situation where you say to the people, okay, if you pay your assessment up front, it's $1,000, but if you wait for the 1 year period, it's 1,200, and if you wait for
no,
that's okay. And
no.
you want to
No, the cost of the common expense item is what it is. Okay. You can't charge people a surcharge. I mean, the surcharge is the interest. That's,
Right.
That's the penalty. You want to call it penalty.
right.
Okay. But no, I mean, your common expenses, are based on, your percentage of each unit or each unit share. And these are the costs, and you can't be, changing that in that manner. So the answer to that is no. You can't have two different assessment rates, in essence, if you pay upfront or pay over time.
Right. And that's what
It's
I wanted to bring
just the interest.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up because I've seen people do that. They'll say, well, look, we're not going to charge you any interest. You can pay in a year or 2 years, but then they're paying a different amount, and you can't assess units different amounts for the same thing. The assessments have to be in accordance with your documents, and they have to be based on, the calculation requirements within your documents. So you can accomplish the same thing by charging interest, but you cannot accomplish that by discounting or surcharging, by changing the assessment that a unit owner has to pay because they decided to pay later. Now, last question I had, Peter, is if I declare the special assessment and then have two different payment dates, that special assessment then is legally attached to that unit, right? I mean, at the point that even though I'm allowing them 2 years to pay, if I've declared the special assessment, then estoppels and things like that would have to note that special assessment, right?
Well, they note the special assessment. You don't necessarily have to note the installments that haven't come due yet. I mean, you pay as you pay. I mean, it all depends how the question is asked, but every owner is liable for the special assessments as they come due. So when that unit is sold, the next owner is going to take it over. But you don't accelerate it upon sale or something like that.
But so let's say that instead of declaring a special assessment and saying, the first payment will be due February of 2022 and the second payment will be due February of 2023, I just say we're probably going to be looking at a special assessment and probably something in 2022 and something in 2023. Now, how does that change what has to be disclosed upon a sale or has to be disclosed to on an estoppel?
Well, the estoppel, is very specific. I mean, the estoppel is, what's outstanding, okay, and what's the frequency of the regular assessment and how much is it, and then what is coming due within the effective period of the certificate, which is either going to be 30 or 35 days, depending on how it's delivered. If it's delivered by hand delivery or email, it's got a 30-day effectiveness. If it's sent by regular mail, it's 35 days. And then you have to disclose what's coming due within those next 30 to 35 days. And there's other stuff that goes in the estoppel, but that's basically, as far as the assessment.
But what about special assessments? I mean, if
that's the same thing, all the assessments.
Okay, but so it's only what's coming due within 35 days. So if 40 days from now or 50 days from now, there's a $10,000 special assessment coming due, there's no requirement to disclose. I mean,
no, you better ask your question differently then, as far as, because that's, no, I mean, again, the estoppel is very specific. So now, if you ask about that, otherwise,
Now, what if the board declares the special assessment and says it's due now, but will allow you to delay payment? So it's due now. So technically the unit owes it right now, but they're not going to pursue.
No, but delaying payment, no, it's when is the due dates? Okay. When is it due? It's not due. If they're delaying it, then it's really not due, is it?
Well, yes, it is, but they're financing it.
No, it's not.
Well, if I'm charging them interest, isn't it due?
I don't know if it's. I mean, if you're giving them an opportunity to pay it over time, seems to me the due dates are then over the time.
Well, see, and that's what I was getting
with the
at.
interest.
And see, what I'm saying is that I think, and this is because this is getting to be an issue, because now with all of the stuff that's coming, people are looking at these huge potential special assessments, and nobody wants to disclose it to anybody. Nobody wants to talk about it, and I'm sure there's going to be.
What you're supposed to disclose on the estoppel again is the periodic assessment and the frequency. It's paid through what date. The next installment of the periodic assessment is due when. An itemized list of all assessments, special assessments owed on that date, and an itemized list of any assessments, special assessments, and other monies that become due for each day after the estoppel for the effective period of the estoppel. And that's it for the estoppel. That's why it's up to a buyer to really ask more questions. Are there special assessments coming due after the estoppel's over?
The issue there is that portion of the law is not written buyer beware. It's really, there's requirements that the realtors have to disclose this information, and they have a requirement to make that information available and disclose that kind of thing. So that's what I'm getting at. I technically think that when you declare a special assessment, that if it's due right then. And that should be listed on your account. You owe this. And then if you've been allowed a period of time in which to make a payment, that's interest, and it's just a financing thing. So
it's not just interest, it's principal and interest.
Well, it's principal and interest, but it's a financing thing.
But those are due dates.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we'll talk about that because I hear the music, so we're running out of time. But Kathleen, I appreciate the question. And Diane, appreciate your questions, and I appreciate everybody listening out there. Peter, thanks again for all of the things you do and all of the questions you answer. And thanks for joining us right here on Condo Solutions Digital 1450 WSTU. That was backwards. Anyway, I thought I'd get you going. Bye.